I do a video about commercials. They're driving up the wall.
9-8, and I am your Spanish interpreter.
Try Boost Lingo on demand. Our software quickly connects you with qualified.
Well, this was supposed to be a short and decisive war. Now we are facing a weapons shortage, and there's no shortage of debate either. While the highest-ranking military leader in this country says we're running out of missiles, President Trump denies reports that the U.S. is suffering a munitions shortage, even vowing in a social media post to seek long-term jail sentences for those suspected of leaking information. J.D. Simpkins is the editor-in-chief of the Military Times and Defense News. He's also a Marine Corps vet. J.D., good to see you. First of all, I just want to get your reaction to the president and his accusations of leaks. I mean, Trump's own chairman of the Joint Chiefs says there's a problem with a weapons shortage.
Well, I think it's kind of part of the course with what we've seen with this administration, where sometimes if it's presented with anything that's, a negative publicity or news, that there might be name calling or things like that directed at the news itself versus addressing any of the concerns that have arisen. And we've seen that, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and with President Trump in the recent days with posts talking about that they're going to sort out or seek out leakers and prosecute them, but simultaneously with claims saying that they have more than enough munitions, more than enough interceptors, would seem to run counter to the pursuit of actually seeking someone out who might be leaking sensitive information if that information is not true.
So this war has been flawed from day one. Is this what happens when you get into a war with no plan, no timeline, and on top of that, you're dealing with Iran?
Yeah, it's something that we've pointed out and I've talked to you about since the outset of this conflict, is that there didn't seem to be a decisive objective in mind or an end goal in mind. We've seen a number of goalposts changing over recent months, and we've seen timelines change where it was going to be a few weeks and then 8 weeks and then, who knows when. And the objectives that were set, whether it's demolishing nuclear capability, demolishing Navy, as we've said from the start, there are military objectives that have been satisfied, but that does not necessarily equate to strategic outcomes. And we're seeing this quagmire unfold in real time. And I think, quite honestly, that's what happens when you have a Pentagon that over the course of many months leading up to this conflict, there have been people who might have been inside that building who might have raised red flags and said, no, this is not a good idea, as many CENTCOM commanders, for instance, have done in the past. But a lot of those people who might have been measuring the approach with this conflict have been fired or resigned in protest at various stages. So I think this is what you're kind of left with, is this, strategic, this muddying of this circumstance. And it's not, it's hard to predict what the outcome is now, as just as much as it was when it started out.
Well, that leads me to my next question after, kind of muddies the water. So the men and women then that are serving right now, they have to serve. They have to listen to the commander in chief. Is there a concern among our service members that, this is going to impact other wartime scenarios or bad actors or countries that want to come after us? Because if we keep going at this war with Iran and we're running out of munitions, I'm just curious if the service members you've talked to are concerned about how this is going to impact our future.
Well, I think the ground level service members are never going to be a question. I think they're going to carry out the mission to the best of their ability, no matter what, and that's regardless of administration or agenda or anything like that. And that's why the military in the past has thrived over so many generations. But I think when you're getting into the upper echelon of command level officers or various things, you are seeing that concern kind of perpetuate throughout different arenas now, where you're, all of this stuff with Iran, all of the munitions expenditures, the rush to try to replenish some of these things, the the big concern is and has been China. And is this going to impede the U.S.'s ability to defend itself if a near peer enemy like China suddenly, wanted to scratch an itch for combat? And that's where the concern would really lie.
Katie Simpkins, always great to have your insight. Appreciate you.
And hello. Today I want to address the Israel connection to policies made in our government. How does Israel affect any of that? And let's proceed. How much money does Israel invest in the United States government? So if by Israel invests in the United States government, you mean money that the Israeli government itself puts in the U.S. government, etc., it says into the government or the U.S. debt. That's a different issue. So I'm just interested in how, like it says, the government, the investment in the U.S. economy. So we're not going there. We're just going into like the mechanization of the United States government with, like donors and stuff like that going towards candidates who are obviously pro-Israel, stuff like that. And how does that go into this? Short answer: Israel does not make a large direct investment into the United States. Obviously, okay, we don't want to expect that to be true. Comparable to U.S. aid to Israel, yeah, we're giving money to Israel that they use, but we're going to find out how money does come from, it goes into certain people in the government, and people want to be in the government, and so because you have to have a lot of money if you want to campaign and stuff like that. So, but Israel doesn't make a large direct investment in the U.S. comparable to what we do to Israel, of course. Israel does not hold U.S. financial assets, etc. So it says Israel doesn't hold U.S. This is stuff that I am totally lost, on. And so I have to read the fine print. And if I put the foot in my mouth, so what, But I assure you that this does. Well, let's just find out. Okay, so Israel just does hold U.S. financial assets. It does hold. Israel does hold U.S. financial assets, including U.S. Treasury securities, but those are investments by Israel's government, central bank, and private Israeli investors. And this is not directed to the government, but this is where money and investment and investors, and you'll see donors coming into this. So there's like these differences that have to be established. So there are three different money flows that we have to separate. So you have Israeli government central bank holdings of U.S. treasuries. So that's tens of billions of dollars. So right there, for a bloke like me, I'd be like, well, then that's exactly what, he was talking about. And I would say, yeah. Remember Devil's in the Details? And this, again, like with a lot of my videos, when you step back, it's like, it would have to be thus. It's so obvious, like follow the money kind of a thing, So you have an activity, and then you have a given desire, and then you see the given outcome. And if they are definitely like in favor of the same outcome, I don't care what anybody says. That was the intention, okay? And that's how you can see with a lot of this stuff. And Israel lends money to the U.S. government by holding its debt. Okay, so the next one, that was 1, 2. Israeli private investment in U.S. businesses, tens of billions. Israeli companies and investors own U.S. assets. Okay, so there's this connection. This is like wedding, fest. United. It's like they're a couple. Like you have like United States is the man and Israel is the woman, and they are definitely like doing this. Hugging and kissing and making out, and it reminds me of American Dad. Like Stan Smith is like one side, he's like Uncle Sam, and then he turns around and now he's Israel, and he starts doing that thing where he's, they're making out, and that's an old cartoon, by the way. By now, that's like, and so again, I say we're supposed to learn from this entertainment, folks. We're supposed to get something from this, and about face collectively, man. I mean, the power of the people. What is going on with the opposite happening all the time? Especially with this. So it's like, okay, so that's the third one being U.S. government aid to Israel. Well, that's going to be like more, and so like 174 billion. So what I'm saying is, so that's like where that's on the surface. Like a lot of us know, yeah, we're giving all sorts of money to Israel, but then the other two is kind of like beneath the surface, and investment banking, buying U.S. bonds, and also private investment in U.S. businesses and stuff like that. I'm curious about like the donors, and I know that I have that in here. I don't know what's going on with that here. Again, this is totally unscripted. I just asked this question like right before I started, recording this segment, and I hadn't had a chance to read through it, So obviously the third one is there's an interaction, the money flow between both parties, and yeah, so that's good to know. Like we've given them like 174 point something billion through the fiscal year 2025. And so we're not looking at that. We're looking at like, well, so Israel invests in us for them to do that, but we'll look at how this affects our government and decisions and stuff like that taking place therein. So the Congressional Research Service calculates that the United States has provided Israel with that's 175 billion from 1946 through fiscal year 2025, including roughly 124.5 billion in military assistance, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the total. Okay, so if I misquoted, now you see how it was corrected right there. Okay, so ChatGPT is trying to help me here. It says, if you're really asking how much money originating from Israel government plus Israeli companies plus Israeli billionaires plus U.S. pro-Israeli donors, PACs, flows into the U.S. political system, that's the better way of putting it, and potentially influence governmental policy, that's a much more interesting calculation, and we can build it category by category rather than mixing fundamentally different kinds of money. And I don't know, I should have said, yeah, okay, go for it. But I asked instead, again, totally unscripted. I'm just, I shot this to the ChatGPT, and so I'm just going through it now. So does this mean that Israel can affect the decision making of our United States government? So I just cut to the chase because that's an interesting question, no? And it says yes, Israel can affect U.S. government decision making. Now that's okay. We gotta stop there for a second and let that sink in. And if you voted for Trump, you're voting for Israel and how it is affecting government decision making. Now I know that Biden and that they were also funding Israel because this is a bigger thing than just Trump. But right now, Trump's the president, and commander in chief and all that, and he's obviously, pushing this. So that's why I kind of circle back to kicking Trump around a little bit more and the Trump supporters a little bit more. But you should know that I know that it's a bigger problem. That Juneau is the capital of Alaska. Did you know that Juneau is a capital? Okay, all right. So, and it wants to make a distinction. It doesn't mean that Israel controls the U.S. government. Oh, yes, it does. So I think it does in certain areas. Okay, I think Israel does control the United States government in the war with Iran. And we're spending a lot of money on this war. And so that's why, again, I'm the human component here, and this human component, which is me, is using this AI component. And that's why I think there's a really interesting kind of a template for a lot of us to do. And so again, I don't use like Mother Jones or whatever, or I just use ChatGPT. And we got to watch out with internet stuff. Like you got to like triangulate. So I just released a video, and I was kind of harping on the thing about Elon Musk and Doge again. But I asked, first I asked ChatGPT, and I said, yeah, there's a connection between his activity and Doge and him becoming a trillionaire. Watch that. I keep circling back to that too, but then I went. But for that video, I said, yeah, now I'm going to go to Grok and ask the same question, and it was trying to deny it. And that just blew my effing mind. And so that's why you gotta like and that's the thing. If you're using AI, don't let people tell you that, then you're not doing any thinking or that. Oh no. On the contrary, I am. Believe me, the biggest problem I have with AI, there's two things. One is the data centers. All right, they suck. And then two is they can replace people's jobs. But then people fucking forget. The biggest elephant in the room is that you have to work for money. You got to have money in order to live on the planet from which you came. That's 3 is the worst problem than AI taking your job, because fuck it, dude, your job sucks anyways. All right, and I had even said this. I said that like basically now, because of the toxicity of our system at large, like every employee is pretty much a tool for the destruction of this fucking world. And I'm sorry, I work, but and there are some jobs that are actually more helpful than harmful. If you work you take care of disabled people in that, I would probably say that you're basically exempt from this. If you're helping, like if you work at a soup kitchen too, you're basically, free from my assessment. But all these I'm talking like your corporate jobs and all these other things, and especially if you're making a lot of money, chances are you're the fucking problem. I hate to say it because it wasn't always like this. It has metastasized to what we are now experiencing, and this is all connected. So this is the distinction it wants to make, and I will have to force myself to read it. The foreign governments can lobby and exert diplomatic pressure. Israel has an extensive diplomatic relationship with Washington and works to influence U.S. policy. Well, that's all we need to know. I should almost end it there. Because that's what I asked. That's what I was interested in. Does Israel influence U.S. policy? And it said so. But we'll continue. American citizens and organizations can legally advocate for Israel. This includes lobbying groups, campaign. Yeah, we know who's doing that. Campaign donors, PACs, think tanks, and advocacy organizations, members of Congress, and presidents respond to political incentives, support from donors, voters, and donors. There's your Citizens United, and how that's all tied into the whole, your First Amendment, which it shouldn't be there. Money should not be speech. All right, a lot of money, that does not equate speech. Which is what the First Amendment is. It's expressions. You can express yourself and you communicate. Money is not a form of communication. It shouldn't be. And yet it is. It's kind of like this, and you raise your hand, and violence is a form of communication. Well, this is like paper violence. Same freaking thing. It's all violence, folks. And that should not be a form of communication. This should be an expressing, and you can, I protest this, or I want to advocate for this. Those are forms of communication and policy making. Money should not be a part of that, because I am advocating a form of violence. Okay, interest groups and foreign policy considerations can all affect their decisions, yes. Okay, so the U.S.-Israeli relationship itself creates leverage. The U.S. provides Israel substantial military and diplomatic support, while Israel provides the U.S. with intelligence, military cooperation, and strategic partnership. Every one of those things is worth unpacking, and they could all constitute, contribute enough info for a separate video for each one. Like, oh, what is the Israeli, military cooperation with the U.S.? Oh, what is the intelligence connection with Israel and the U.S.? Oh, what is the strategic partnership between the U.S. and Israel? Israel to the U.S. in the U.S. These are all three are very interesting to focus on, but we won't right now. We'll just continue. Now, this is the correction it wants to make, but there's an important correction. Now, remember the things I just said. I read that it said. Now, look at what it tries to say here. And I never read this yet, but I'm suspecting. But there is an important correction to the premise of your previous question. Israeli government money isn't generally being just deposited into the U.S. government and then used to buy decisions. The influence mechanism is much more complicated and is predominantly diplomatic, strategic, political, lobbying, and electoral rather than a straightforward financial transaction. Basically, what it's saying is, that is exactly what is happening. And so, but with laws, like I was talking about laws, the paper chase, we get to bullshit anything. And so we can make thievery legal. And so it's kind of like, imagine a thief coming to your house and they want to, squat, or they want to, they want to squat in your house. They want to take shit from your house. And they're like, well, we have all the documents that say we can't do this and the police can't kick us out. That's all they're fucking saying. It's the same kind of argument. It doesn't matter if it's legal or not. It's still fucking wrong. And so, like, what I want to do is, I get into philosophical, content, and I was religious in the traditional sense. If I'm religious now, it's in a very esoteric, almost mystical sense. I'm a 21st century mystic. Yeah, that's pretty much how I like to see myself, because we don't know what's really out there or in here, in the deepest sense of the terms, and that's why I know that there's something fantastic that's just beneath the surface, and mystics all know that. Boy, am I running off on a tangent. So I have to get back and jump off this UFO, Bill Hicks UFO kind of ride that I just jumped on. And I got to somehow get back to the foundation of our discussion. And I sort of like, oh, where was I going with that? Oh, man, I had some good point to make. And I can't remember it. But there's an important correction to the, it says that it's done legally. And so it's not like, here's just a bunch of money, Oh yeah, what it was is regarding the or like so basically, at least for the West, because I'm a Westerner, you know, I tend to look over the fence to the East and go, wow, man, India is really cool, and I love Japan, I love China, you know, especially the cultural differences, and I've read some literature, I read some books, and I should show you the library that I got, but I'm very much a Westerner, and I, you know, I'm happy about it. You know, I love European art. I love Western art. That's just how I am. And but anyways, the point. What point? Am I, oh, okay. So the thing is, I was religious in a traditional sense for like 20 years, and so we were taught that laws come from God. You know, and so that means that if laws come from the from God, that means that they're unmutable. You can't change them. They're eternally binding. Okay, so we're that's how you're supposed to like practice everything. And like in a theocracy, that's the theory. You're supposed to do it that way in a given theocracy, and it's a mess, really. One of the things about these overly religious communities, though, like this is not like a government, but let's talk about people like the Amish. They're very religious, and they live like under the rule of their God's thumb. But you know what's interesting about these people? Although I don't know if I can live like that because I've been so contaminated, you know, um, is they are a less carbon footprint than the rest of us. Okay. But what I was trying to say is here, and so that was the idea that well, laws come from God, so you have to somehow stick to it. So that's where the authenticity of laws come. That's why we have laws, you know. But the problem with that is nobody's obeying those laws. And if you look at those laws, if you read in the Old Testament, there's problems because you have like the Ten Commandments, which I know by heart. Do you know the Ten Commandments by heart? How many of you Christians here? How many of you Christians know the Ten Commandments by heart that are voting for Trump? Okay, how many Trump supporters who are voting for Trump know the Ten Commandments by heart? Like, how many know that the first four commandments address God and the other six address like how you're supposed to behave? So it deals with people. So like the first four are like worshiping God and owning having that God, and then don't make any graven image and worship it, and then remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, and don't use God's name in vain. I might get the order a little off, doesn't matter. The other and the fifth one is honoring your mother and father. And the reason why, I'll give you a little Bible lesson here. The reason why is because in this world, your father and mother are kind of like your gods. They brought you into this world. So then you have that. And then you got like 6, 7, 8, 9. And so the other ones are like, don't commit adultery, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, and don't covet your neighbor's shit. And so that's basically your 10 commandments. And I guarantee you, some of you fucking asshole Trump supporters do not remember the time. You're like, oh, I'm going to Google it. Remember? No. Put it in here. I know that. I could go out and witness to people about Christ anytime I want because I done it. I got Bibles, and I could easily jump right back into that. And so like I sometimes read the Bible. I still keep up on the lingo so that I could defend myself among these Christians that have voted for Trump. And boy, I will slam dunk your ass. All right, I will totally slam dunk your ass. You disgusting abomination to the faith. You are a total abomination. You American Christians voting for Trump have nothing to do with. Here, I'll show you what a drawing. I did a quick little drawing on a piece of wood about what I think Jesus might have really looked like. Let me pause this and get it. You see it? It's a little blurry. That's probably what the real Jesus looked like. Not this. All right? This. This is probably what he really looked like. The matted black hair, very dark skin, big freaking nose, because he's described in the Bible as being very ugly, and yeah, he was made even more ugly after he was disfigured when they crucified him and they screwed him up. But that's basically what he looks like, I think. And I just drew that off the top of my head. Yeah, so this thing like, trying to correct me and all that, when it's like, no, it's obviously we already I can almost end the video with that, because we already know now that yes, Israel and pro-Israel interests influence U.S. governmental decisions. That's pretty much the end of the video, man. But here I am going to continue chasing this dog as it walks by. So, and this kind of ticks me off, but I'll read it. It's like, so it talks about the distinction between influence and control. It's like, oh, it doesn't control it, it influences it, it doesn't control it. It's like, I'm just going to move on. But then it goes, if you want, I can break down exactly how much influence each channel has. And it goes into this thing. And I go, yes. So there is substantial pro-Israel influence on U.S. policy making. And that's pretty much what I was trying to, demonstrate. But it comes primarily through American political actors and institutions, which, yes, of course, it does. Not through Israeli simply transferring money to the U.S., which it tries to make it sound like I'm that stupid to assume that, and not knowing about, lobbying and all that, and PACs and stuff like that. The major channels, pro-Israel political organizations. The most obvious example is American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the AIPAC. And so that's when you hear people talk about the AIPAC. That's what that is. And that's something to unpack and unpack the AIPAC and learn about the AIPAC's influence on American government policy making. In 2025, the AIPAC contributed $26.77 million to candidates and other committees, making it the largest membership PAC in the FEC's ranking. Boy, I mean, and that's it's like, and it's like it's not enough that these politicians have to get on your phone and text you and have a picture of them. Usually they're all military. You have this person dressed like a soldier. Hey, I'm running for office, Congress or whatever, and like they try to appeal to your base, what you believe, and your party base, and then they always ask for money. Well, hey man, why do I freaking do that? I get like a whole bunch of people's phone numbers, which shouldn't be a lot. I'm getting tired of this. It's like who gets my fucking phone number? You can put like a face on there. Hey, yeah, give me money because I'm a soldier and I'm now going to be a politician. I want you to give me my money. Again, money should not be in politics. You have an open forum that's funded by the state. And there's certain kinds of criteria you have to fulfill before you get to go up there and you say, hey, I'm going to run for a Congress or whatever. And none of that has to do with money. Instead, it has to involve like, your intelligence and stuff like that. And if you have a criminal record and stuff like that. And that way you can have somebody from the sticks or someone from the projects showing up when it's time for people to get up. And they kind of do it on these different levels. And it whittles down to like 3 or 4 people because they had to do that again and again, and to get to that point. And it has nothing to do with money. That's state funded. And I'm just making this up. All right. But I think that if a bloke like me can come up with ideas like that kind of sounds more reasonable. And I hope that my ideas are like childlike, because like I said, when you're a child, you're more closer to your original nature, and hopefully it's something good. But then by the time you get into middle age, you've compromised your ass. A lot of you have. I don't think I have. I might have made some wrong decisions out of fear, but I never compromised. All right. And yeah, and you might not make a lot of money if you stick to your guns, but if you do compromise to make more money, how much more of a fucking whore are you then? All right. You're worse than a fucking commercial. All right. And people who are doing commercials, I'm so screwed up in the head about people who are proud that they've got on like TV or whatever, or in the social, network, like on YouTube. Yeah, that's me in that commercial. You know what? You know who has more of a fan base than you? A real prostitute. Because their services are desired by the people paying them. Yours is not by the person who's forced to watch your ass while they're watching a program on YouTube or anything. And Bill Hicks said it. If you're part of the commercial end of all this, you know, he wants you to just like commit suicide. And everyone's like, I'm sorry, man. I'm really, I don't want to get angry in this video. My last one, he gave me at the end of it, ripping into some people. But all right, anyways. So yeah, I mean, decision making is there. And so we're talking 26.77 million to the candidates. And guess what? None of that's going to you. All right. Even larger is the United Democracy Project, the UDP, a pro-Israel super PAC. According to the FEC, UDP received $98.6 million during 2025 through May 2026 and had spent $34.1 million by March 31, 2026, including $12.65 million in independent expenditures. Importantly, this money is, I should start talking like Kermit the Frog. Importantly, this money is overwhelmingly from American individuals, not Israeli government. The FEC reports 95.8 million of UDP's 98.6 million in receipts as individual contributions. That's from the FEC government, FEC.gov. Remember, there's a lot of sources that this gleans from. So calling that Israel for calling that Israel buying the U.S. government would be inaccurate. No, it's not. It's accurate. Okay, I don't care. It's accurate. Joker's gonna start coming out. Of course, it's buying it. It's all about money. If you ain't making any substantial income as a public servant, and you're not, you know, why are you gonna give all this shit to Israel if you're not getting anything back? All right. All right. It totally is. It's more accurately described as Americans spending enormous amounts of money to promote candidates and policies favorable to Israel. Yeah, and they're all like, you know, from Israel, and they're American citizens now. That's one, and two, you know, they believe in this ridiculous religiosity, probably that constitutes a need to usher in more wars and destruction, to bring the apocalypse into effect. And other Abrahamic religions are all tied into that, especially Christianity and Islam. It's messed up, man. And Netanyahu plays on that. Okay, the U.S. government's strategic relationship with Israel. This is a completely different source of influence. The U.S. government itself considers Israel strategically important. Well, duh. The Congressional Research Service says the relationship rests on factors including shared strategic goals, historical ties, and strong domestic U.S. support for Israel. And that's actually Congress.gov. That's the source. And each one of those, what are the shared strategic goals? And that's a really interesting one. And it has something to do with the Middle East and controlling it. It has to. It has to. And it has to do with the fact that there's a lot of oil there. It has to. You know what I mean? And the financial relationship is enormous, but it runs largely from Washington to Israel. Oh yeah, like we're the implicators here. It's not just Israel, you know. Through 2025, the U.S. had provided approximately $175 billion in aid to Israel in current dollars since 1946. The current 10-year agreement calls for $38 billion in U.S. military assistance for the fiscal year of 2019 through fiscal year. This goes all the way into the 2028. Well, I say fuck that. Fuck that. While people are like living from paycheck to paycheck, and like Trump was like, America first, America first. It's the Democrats. They're the ones that are going to spend too much of our resources on these international wars. And it's the Democrats, it's the Democrats. And look what the hell is happening. He's bringing us into World War III. All right. And there's what was my video clip about? You know, what was that about? Us running out of munitions? I mean, what's the next strategy? If boots on Iranian ground ain't gonna work, which it won't, and we can't use our conventional weapons because we're fucking running out of that. What's the third option, people? What's the third option? What's the third option? Joker. What's the third option? Huh? What's the third option? Nuclear. You go nuclear. What do you think? Because they are not going to drop this bone. These dogs are not going to drop this bone. All right. So paradoxically, the much more larger direct financial flow is actually from the United States to Israel. Yeah, but we've already there's like two things going on at once. Like we're giving them money, but they're also giving us money. And that money does not go into our government because if it went into our government, it could wind up in the infrastructure, like our taxes supposedly is supposed to help with our infrastructure. No, it would have been better if the money went right straight to the government so that they can spend it on hospitals or however that stuff works and spend it on other things, public services. But no, Doge is getting rid of all those public services anyways, and the regulation agencies that stop monopolies from happening. So where's the money going? It goes to individual people who are running for office, and that affects policy making. Right? It's like, so there's a lot of bullshit that, let me read this in silence. I'm going to pause this. I passed the one where it's like, yeah, this is how we're giving Israel money. And it starts breaking down the military aid that we're giving Israel. And like, duh, I don't think we have to go over that. Obviously, it's happening. But it says something about, it goes Israel to U.S. diplomacy, American pro-Israel organizations to lobbying, American wealthy donors to PACs and super PACs, American voters to elections. And that's kind of like where I'm drawing on this. Defense companies to lobbying economic interests, U.S. intelligence, military establishment to strategic interests. All of these can push policy in the same direction. And because they're independent actors, you don't need a direct payment from Israel to produce any of this. And that's a good thing. That's the only reason I did this, because it kind of helps, articulate these concepts. Okay, and because they're independent actors, you don't need a direct payment from Israel to produce substantial pro-Israel influences in Washington. So does Israel affect American decision making? Yes, it says it right here. But it wants me to phrase it differently, and it says Israel is one of the foreign countries that has significant influence on U.S. foreign policy, and pro-Israel political organizations have a significant presence in American policies. However, the evidence does not support reducing the influence to Israel pays U.S. government. Yeah, it does, indirectly. The people who will wind up in the government. All right. Much of the political spending comes from Americans, that are tied in with the interests of Israel, supremacy of the Middle East, while the strategic relationship is maintained by the U.S. policymakers for a combination of political, military, diplomatic, and strategic reasons. And so it goes into this. This is where it kind of goes down this rabbit trail, and it says there's a especially interesting question we can investigate next: whether the enormous pro-Israel political spending actually changes congressional votes. And I'm like, it does, right? Yes, it does. There is evidence that political spending and lobbying can affect congressional behavior. And so let's just move on. So it goes money to political influence to potentially changed behavior. Thank you. For Israel specifically, there are several mechanisms. Campaign contributions. Candidates may become more reluctant to alienate major donors or political networks. Super PAC spending. Organizations can spend millions supporting candidates who take favorable positions and attacking candidates who don't. Lobbying. Organizations provide information, draft legislation, mobilize constituents, and communicate political consequences, primary elections. This can be especially powerful because a relatively small amount of spending can matter greatly in a low turnout primary. Political signaling. Legislators know that taking strongly anti-Israel positions can trigger organized opposition, organized crime opposition, organized crime, organized. Are you organized? Are we organized? Hey, I'll tell you who is organized. They are. But there's an important chicken and egg problem. People who already strongly support Israel are also more likely to donate to pro-Israel candidates. So when we observe that a politician receives pro-Israel money and votes for Israel, we can't automatically conclude that the money causes the vote. Oh, yes, I can. Yeah. Okay, anyways, there is also evidence that American public opinion, evangelical Christian support in the U.S., yeah, of course, strategic interest, defense interests, and long-standing bipartisan foreign policy traditions independently contribute to congressional support for Israel. Yeah, it does. So I'd agree with your basic point. It agrees. If you want to take this one step further, we can look at specific congressional votes and compare the politicians' pro-Israel donations, lobbying support against how they voted. So let's see. Look at specific congressional votes. This is what I'm saying. Yeah, look at specific congressional votes and compare the politicians' pro-Israel donations, lobbying support against how they voted. Yes, I looked at an actual vote, and it gives us a much better way to examine the claim. Example, the April 20, 2024 Israel aid vote. The House voted on H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, providing additional U.S. assistance related to Israel's war. Kind of like you know what the Vietnamese called the Vietnam War? They call it the American War. Well, look at this, ladies and germs. This is Israel's war. It passed 366 to 58. Republicans 193 to 21. Democrats 173 to 37. Interesting part is what happens when we look at individual members alongside pro-Israel political activity. Member, vote, pro-Israel political activity, what happens? So Jamel Bowman, a Democrat, New York Democrat. UDP spent about $9.87 million opposing him in 2024. Lost Democratic primary to George Latimer. Cori Bush, Democrat. Nay. UDP spent about $5.24 million opposing her. Lost Democratic primary to Wesley Bell. Richie Torres, Democrat, us New York. He said, yay, major recipient of AIPAC support. Remains strongly pro-Israel. Thomas Massie, Republican. And nay, consistently opposed additional Israeli aid, became a prominent opponent of the pro-Israel consensus. Okay, UDP spending figures come from FEC-based independent expenditure data, and that's AIPAC Watch. Okay, and this is where the evidence becomes particularly interesting. Bowman voted against the Israeli supplemental, and that's from Vote C. Then during his 2024 primary, the pro-Israeli political network poured enormous amounts of money into defeating him. UDP alone reported approximately $9.87 million in expenditures opposing Bowman, while supporting his opponent, George Latimer. That's AIPAC Watch. Bowman subsequently lost. That doesn't prove that AIPAC caused his defeat by itself. Latimer had other advantages, and the race involved issues besides Israel. But it is very difficult to look at that sequence and say that, pro-Israel political organizations were exerting political pressure. Well, yes, I know. I do want to continue. AIPAC itself openly describes its strategy this way. It works to elect candidates who support the U.S.-Israel relationship and to defeat candidates who don't. And it's just a game of strength, who's stronger than the other. And it's not about fairness. If you want to talk about laws and fairness and justice and all that, these are immeasurables, imponderables. And like, you go to law school, they don't want to deal with that shit. You know what I mean? Things like love, forget about it. Okay. Cori Bush is another striking example. Bush also voted nay on the Israeli supplemental. That's vote C. UDP subsequently spent approximately $5.24 million opposing her in her 2024 primary. AIPAC Watch. Now think about that. So these people are spending like over $5 million to stop somebody else winning, a primary. What a waste of money. You could help so much in the streets of our communities and all that. And this is why, like, I'm into the Venus Project kind of a thing, because Jacques Fresco says, that's why all this money is bleeding into, all this resource and energy bleeds into the cracks of our fractured system. And you cannot retract or retrieve that back. That's lost. Oh, well, maybe I should correct myself. It somehow goes back into their pockets. But you get the point. I was trying to be a little bit more poetic. Anyways, okay, he lost to Wesleyan Bell. Okay. Again, correlation isn't proof of causation. Yeah, it is! That's the whole freaking argument. That's my whole argument. I've been thinking that. That's the difference between me and a lot of like these fair players or whatever. Correlation is not proof of causation. Oh, and I understand that in terms of science. Like, so people who are born with they look ugly or whatever, a big ass nose or whatever. It's because of what they did in a previous life. And so now they're cursed with this big schnauzola, No, I'm not saying that's obvious. You know what I'm saying? And then with science, this is definitely correlation is not proof of causation. Yeah, in science, but when it comes to people, like in politics and stuff and money and all that, I think it totally does. That's the difference. And okay, anyways. So, I mean, the group spends millions trying to remove her from office. And she said nay to. Okay, and there's an important counterexample. Look at Thomas Massie. Massie has repeatedly opposed additional Israel, and despite being a Republican in a generally pro-Israel Republican caucus, in 2024, he was one of the Republicans voting against the Israeli supplemental. Okay, fine. I ain't going to delete that, I'm going to be honest or fair as much as I can, although my position. Okay, that demonstrates something important. AIPAC isn't omnipotent. If money completely controls congressional votes, people like Massey wouldn't exist. Yeah, I would say, they let one slip by, so it's not so freaking obvious. That's, again, I'm just going to come out and say it, you know. And here's where I think your original argument becomes strong or stronger. We don't actually need to prove that every individual vote was purchased. The more defensible position or proposition is pro-Israel political organizations create substantial electoral incentives for members of Congress to support Israel-friendly policies and substantial electoral penalties for members who oppose them. And we have direct evidence of this mechanism. AIPAC openly says it wants to elect pro-Israel candidates and defeat distractors. That's AIPAC. FEC records the actual money being spent. That's FEC.gov. Congressional records tell us how the politicians actually voted. That's clerk of the U.S. ... something. I'm not going to click on the link. I'm giving you the idea that these are coming from different sources. Okay, and in cases such as Bowman and Bush, we can see the political consequences when members make positions contrary to the pro-Israel political network. One crucial distinction: none of this establishes that the Israeli government itself paid these politicians. Yeah, I mean, that would be like, you got to put it into the system. And then the system gets to do what it does with the money to get these people elected. And also, you put money in the system blocks people from getting elected if they oppose a desired outcome. That's basically how I would, boil it down. In fact, AIPAC explicitly says its donors and members are Americans. Well, I'm glad it says that, because that only strengthens my argument, because these Americans are really in alignment with Israel, and that it is not directed or funded by Israeli government. You remember Stan, Uncle Sam and Israel? Well, Stan was an American man, was he not? Okay, Stan Smith. Okay, Israel. So it's like Israel. Diplomatic and strategic influence, American pro-Israel organizations lobbying and plus electoral pressure, American donors, campaign financing, PACs and super PACs, enormous electoral spending, Congress, votes and policy. That's a real influence network. Calling it Israel directly goes beyond the evidence. Let's continue. But saying pro-Israel political spending can materially influence who gets elected and therefore who makes U.S. policy is much easier to substantiate. And there is an even stronger test we can do. Take the 2024 House vote and calculate the pro-Israel money received by every member who voted yes versus every member who voted no. That would give us an actual statistical comparison rather than cherry picking Bowman and Bush. Okay, proceed. That's me. I did the comparison, but there's an important methodological issue. We should not pretend that AIPAC UDP spending received by a member before a vote is equivalent to all pro-Israel money. The cleanest measurable variable is AIPAC PAC contributions plus UDP independent expenditures, while recognizing that many pro-Israel donors give directly to candidates without going through those organizations. The 2024 Israel aid vote. On April 20, 2024, the House passed H.R. 8034, the Israeli Security Supplemental Appropriations Act 366-58. There were 173 Democrats and 193 Republicans voting yes versus 37 Democrats and 21 Republicans voting no. That's Congress.gov. The interesting pattern emerges when we look at the politicians who don't follow the overwhelming majority. Representative James Bowman, Democrat, New York, voted no. UDP ultimately spent $9.87 million opposing him. That's a lot of money that's being wasted just to stop somebody from winning. So he lost in a primary. He lost a primary. Okay, Cori Bush, Democrat, no. UDP spent millions opposing her. She lost. Thomas Massie, Republican, voted no. UDP spent 319. Hey, so UDP spent 319 million. No, that's like $319,783 opposing him in 2024, but he won anyways. But okay, he won, but they had to spend money to oppose him. So the power of influence might not have worked that much in his case. And I was thinking, yeah, because they have to throw us a bone, Richie Torres, Democrat. He said yes. Among the major AIPAC recipients. In other words, he got a lot of money. So money was not so it's like, hey, okay. You got a lot of money there, man. He remains in Congress. George Latimer, challenger. AIPAC PAC gives his campaign $1.32 million by March 2024. He defeated Bowman. I mean, all this money, and none of it's going to you. Okay, Wesley Bell, Democratic, the challenger. AIPAC PAC gave his campaign $555,000. You have like 666, 555,000 by March 2024. With UDP spending additionally, he defeats Bush. The AIPAC PAC figures come from FEC-derived records. For example, by March 31, 2024, Latimer was the largest recipient listed at 1 point, something million, while Torres had received about 598,000 and Bell about 555,000. Okay. And UDP spending is directly documented in FEC-based records. In Bowman's race alone, UDP ultimately spent $9 million, close to 10 million opposing him. But here is the really important finding. The vote itself does not demonstrate that AIPAC money bought the vote. Okay, so why? Because much of the enormous UDP spending happened after the April 20 vote. Bowman, Bush, etc. were subsequently targeted during their primaries. So we have to separate the two propositions. But it did say before that the influence was present, right? So we hold on to that, okay? Pro-Israel money caused the April 20 vote. We don't have sufficient evidence to establish that from this comparison. The pro-Israeli political organizations can punish politicians electorally for opposing Israel. Here are the evidences consistently stronger. Consider Bowman. He voted against the Israeli supplemental. Then the AIPAC-aligned UDP spent nearly $9.9 million opposing him. While supporting his opponent, George Latimer, the FEC-derived records show the spending explicitity, and that's ProPublica. I can barely read that. Okay, Bowman lost. Bush provides another example. UDP spent heavily against her and supported Wesley Bell. The documented expenditures include more than $1.1 million against Bush in a single July 30 expenditure, among many other expenditures. So, she lost as well. But Massie is extremely important. Massie voted against Israel, and he was targeted, but he won. But okay, so the devil's in the details there. But I think it's because they threw us a bone. Just know that they were spending a lot of money to stop him. All right. Maybe it was orchestrated. They didn't spend like $1 million. The UDP records show that $160,000 opposing Massie on May 22. 152,773 opposing him on May 9. That's at least 319,783 in records, were examined, and he won anyways. But that's nothing compared to 9.9 million people. I don't know. It's just, the numbers really, hook me. The numbers hook my attention. I can't help it. What if they spent 9.9 million to stop Massey? I'm just putting it out there. Okay, hold on one second. So it says strong evidence pro-Israel political organizations have developed a mechanism for rewarding politicians who support their preferred positions and spending heavily against politicians who don't. Strong evidence that spending can be enormous, millions of dollars in individual congressional races. UDP's 2024 cycle spending was about 31.4 million, and the FEC derived data examined here with about 19.9 million directed against candidates, but only for Massey it was like a few thousand, 500,000. Okay, that's pro-public again. Okay, strong evidence. In at least some cases, politicians who opposed the preferred Israel position subsequently faced massive electoral spending and lost their primaries. And then the moderate evidence and the, let's just move on. Okay. I mean, you get the picture, right? And so politicians know that supporting Israel brings political resources, while opposing can bring millions of dollars against them. That's a form of electoral pressure rather than a direct bribe, and that's to me, it's the same freaking thing. And that distinction matters legally, and so the difference between like the mob, the Italian mafia, and all that, and the government is the mafia believes like this too, and the way they do things is they do it like what's considered illegal. They don't have the paperwork to defend what they're doing. They do it by force. But their intention is the exact same thing as the people who do it supposedly legally. It's the same kind of thing, but it looks different on paper. But the outcome is the same. And same with like dictatorships and stuff like that. So like dictatorships might do it the way that looks very, illegal. It's just, you're just bribing everybody, and then you got dictatorship, How about that? It's better than the mafia thing. But here with us, we have paperwork, we have legality and all this stuff, and but to me, it's just the same. We are drawing a fine line between the dictatorship and the democracy that we are systematically losing every day. Okay, so there is credible evidence that the pro-Israel political network exerts meaningful influence over the incentives facing members of Congress. The evidence is particularly strong for electoral influences. What is harder to prove is that this financial influence directly determines individual congressional votes. All the stuff that we're talking about, and just I read that to you, but still, what do you really think? And so I think there's a little bit more than when it ended. If we want to go one step further or deeper, the next test would be even more revealing. Compare the entire 58-member no block against the 366-member yes block, and measure their AIPAC UDP financial exposure before the vote, rather than examining individual examples. That would tell us whether the relationship survives a much larger sample and would be a substantially better test of your original hypothesis. Okay, proceed. Yes, I went further, and the result is actually more nuanced and more useful than simply saying that AIPAC money buys votes. Okay, well, let's find out. The vote we are testing on April 20, 2024, the House passed H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, 36658. The breakdown was Democrats, yes, 173, no, 37. Republicans, yes, 193, and no, 21. Total 366, and yes, and total no, 58. The bill contained about 26.4 billion in Israeli-related security assistance. That's cross-check. So the first thing that jumps out is that support was overwhelmingly bipartisan. So, what did Hillary Clinton say if she became president? That she would go to war with Iran. So, you got to remember. I mean, although I do say I do vote Democrat, and then we take them. Just cross with like they're okay. Now you're gonna do, you're gonna be more fair with what we're putting into, the government here in the form of our taxes and what we want. I mean, take a trip down memory lane and listen to Frank Zappa. And he's singing like the folks down in Washington only take care of number one, and number one ain't you, and you're not even number two. Okay, so that goes for, of course it's bad system to be bipartisan. I would be completely shocked if it was just the Republicans doing this. And so what I'm saying, the Israeli, American government and the whole system, it's still the government and the policy making. And remember what it said in the beginning. Yes, there's a heavy influence in policy, decision making involved here. So no matter what all this devil in detail is saying, it still is proven to be so based on ChatGPT's own words. So that does not impress me one bit. Does receiving pro-Israel money predict the vote? Does receiving pro-Israel money predict the vote? Yes. And then it goes, but it isn't remotely perfect. I mean, you got to remember when Grok said that there was no connection between the wealth, Elon Musk's wealth, and after he got out of, after he was interacting with Doge. But then the ChatGPT said, oh, yes, there is. And so, but here, and that's with Elon Musk, and it's related to him. Here, it's related to Israel. And so that's a bigger octopus than Elon Musk, and that's some really weird stuff that's happening. And I think it's like it can't get ChatGPT to completely lie, but it gets it to say something like this: yes, there is a relationship between pro-Israel money predicting the vote. So yes, so does receiving pro-Israel money predict the vote? Yes, there is a relationship, and then it's forced to go or say, but it isn't remotely perfect. I never said it would be perfect, but it's there. It's evident. So I don't want to read that part anymore. So we know. So bring it down to the end of this. It says, if your original question was essentially, can Israel, through its relationship with the United States and the broader pro-Israel political network, affect the decisions of the U.S. government? Yes. The evidence supports that conclusion. The more precise statement is that Israeli-related interests have meaningful influence within the American political system, rather than Israel literally controlling the American government. And so, but still, it is what it is. Okay. Thank you for listening and watching and doing both simultaneously.